Welcome to Show Money, the only show exclusively dedicated to the business of mixed martial arts. Once again, we've got Jason Cruz, our lawyer, John Nash, the man who knows everyone and everything in mixed martial arts, and yours truly is Paul Giff, the economist. Today we're going to be kind of playing off the DJ situation, Demetrious Johnson situation, with bullying Dana White, but get into negotiating title shots, negotiations for pay-per-view points, and a little bit about the flyweight division, and just sort of play off it from there. So, Jason, starting with you, what did you make of the DJ Dana White situation, the allegation of bullying?
Well, I think just to go back a little bit, I think it was last Monday where Demetrious Johnson, who I believe is actually on vacation, sent a text over to which got a lot of traction with MMA media. Basically, he's been accompanying me all this time, and now he's kind of been fed up and sent this long text that I believe lots of people have seen already, where he's talked about the UFC's mistreatment and bullying of him. And so he's been forced to speak out. He thinks that they haven't been able to market him correctly. He has a big beef with the matchmaking process. And at this point, he's at a impasse as to where he's going to fight next or what he's going to do next. In the interview with Ariel Helwani, I think he said he might look to see if he can work at Costco next, but I don't think that's going to happen. But in terms of the text and the subsequent interview afterward, Dana White replied on TMZ, of course, where he kind of laid out his side of the story, saying that how can a guy be bullied? He's arguably the pound for pound champ. Actually, he retracted that and said that Conor McGregor was, but he went kind of word for word as far as basically that Demetrious Johnson doesn't sell, and kind of went and offered his rebuttal as far as debunking what Demetrious Johnson said. Now, what do you guys think about, first of all, Johnson's text, his interview, and then White's response? We could go ahead and see.
My opinion of it was a little surprising. I mean, more than a little surprising, because Demetrious Johnson has been the definition of a company man for years. Very quiet, soft-spoken, but very supportive of the promotion. He hasn't been creating waves, but he's gone through an arc that a lot of other fighters describe. I know Nathan Quarry and Tim Kennedy have described this arc, at least on the record. Other guys off the record will say this. It's the arc is you start out and you're just happy being in the UFC. And then you're happy you're getting paid more. And then as your career gets longer and starts winding down, then the frustration kicks in as you realize that your career is going to be coming to an end soon and you haven't made as much as you'd hoped or that you think you should be making more. And that he seems to be following the arc of a lot of other guys that were, very, very happy with their careers until one point it just changed. It flopped. The switch was hit and they were frustrated, upset. So that, and the other, what else I found interesting, I thought was great, is Demetrious Johnson lays out this whole case that he's being bullied and abused mostly by Dana White in the UFC. And so Dana White comes back and says it's impossible, and then goes on to bully the man by saying he's no longer the pound for pound best, even though 2 months earlier he called him the GOAT. A couple months ago he called him the GOAT, the greatest of all time at any weight class, and now he's no longer anywhere in that ballpark. So he goes off and just goes off on his fighter. What I also find interesting, in some ways I wonder if that's intentional. Dana White's purpose before was to be the spokesperson, the figurehead of the UFC, to basically be the star of the UFC. But he also played the part behind the scenes from a lot of people that he was the bad cop to Lorenzo Fertitta's good cop. That was his job. Joe Silva played that part too, the bad cop often. But now I wonder if he's playing the same bad cop with the new management owners. He's the lightning rod to take all the criticism. It's his fault. He's the jerk doing all this stuff. Blame him and don't blame the UFC, the rest of the new ownership. It's only Dana White that's the jackass causing these problems. Paul, you think I'm onto something, or am I crazy?
I mean, I think you're onto something with the good cop, bad cop, and is it Ari Emanuel or someone else over at WME-IMG playing the good cop now? I mean, I feel for DJ just because he's in the unenviable position of being, arguably the best of all, pound for pound. But he's in a sport where when when he comes out and says, look, every other sport, the people who win get paid the most. But when you look at those other sports, if you actually study those other sports, winning is what drives a lot in terms of revenue. Fans actually in basketball, NBA don't care if your team is that boring as long as you win. And that's sort of what's been shown over and over again. But then you go into MMA and you don't have that. You have to win, of course, to be even reasonably popular, but it's about entertainment and eyeballs. It always seems to go back to that. And so he's trying to fight that bad position that he's in that makes no sense to us because we're core fans and we love the guy and we think he's amazing. But he just doesn't seem to draw for whatever reason. And so this has to work into his negotiations and to his pay-per-view points and his negotiations with the UFC. So how do you think that plays out, Jason?
Well, I think two things. I think that the interesting thing that John had pointed out was the career arc, and I think that usually that occurs on the downside of a fighter's career. And here we have basically Johnson at the arc. I mean, at the top of his career. I mean, he's still on a tremendous win streak. He owns the flyweight division, and yet he's very unhappy with how he's being marketed to the company. I also think one of the interesting things that came out in the text and probably was interesting to me is that Mick, I think it was Mick Maynard, basically told DJ that, listen, smaller fighters don't sell. And, I guess I applaud him for his truthfulness, but he had to know that that would not sit well with DJ. He can't do anything about, his weight division and the fact that he's basically the best on the planet with that. So I'm not sure where he goes from here. Obviously, in other sports, boxing, not boxing. In other sports like baseball and football, where you have contract squabbles and contract impasses, where there's people when there's bad blood between the two sides. At one point, they'll usually come together. I don't think Johnson didn't say anything about him retiring or walking away, just that he's angry. So I'm not sure if this acting out is one of those things that happens and then they come back together and Johnson gets a new deal, gets some of what he wants. But, in the interview with Ariel Helwani, it was very telling that he felt like he wasn't being marketed and correctly, and that he wasn't giving the appropriate opportunities. And it's interesting because here's the guy who had one of probably the most prized sponsors pre-Reebok. He had an exclusive deal with Xbox or with Microsoft, basically. And I remember when that came out early on, a lot of people wanted some information on who to contact at Microsoft to try to sell their fighter on it, because they like video games and things like that. And they were only sticking with DJ, and which is interesting because they could have gone with a bigger star at the time, but he was the only real guy to go there, and stuck with him until the Reebok deal. So it's interesting that at the end he'll probably kiss and make up with the UFC, but at this point he's laid out his case.
Yeah, what I find interesting, I think part of DJ's problem, and it's not just that lightweights are not as popular. And that's true. Lightweights are generally not as popular. The higher you go up in weight class, the more fighters like them. The business model, the way the UFC works, and the way MMA in general works, doesn't really suit DJ. If you look at it in MMA, it's either Bellator or UFC. They want ratings on TV, or they want to sell pay-per-views. Where if you look at like boxing, if UFC had like an HBO Showtime partner, look at Chocolatito Gonzalez. He's not a major star, but he draws hardcore fans that would watch him on HBO. That's subscribers. HBO makes a lot more money on that. There's no model, since UFC is not putting that much effort into their Fight Pass. If you look at the lender's presentation, it doesn't sound like they're making that much on it. If you look at what they've done the last year or so, it's obvious they're not making that big a commitment to Fight Pass. There's no way for DJ to be the draw that I think he can be to hardcore fans. There's no way to monetize, I should say, those hardcore fans that will tune into him. Where if it was HBO or Showtime, there might be tens of thousands of fans that would subscribe to those channels just to make sure they got all of his title fights. Those add up over a year. That's a lot of money over a year. That's several million. So he could maybe demand the close to $1 million that Gonzalez supposedly got for his last fight. You know, so that's what's really hurting him, I think, is the way the system's set up, and it's unfortunate for him. The other thing it's set up is, I think this whole squabble does do a good example of showing the problems, I guess how negotiating and titles work hand in hand in the UFC. That a lot of people were surprised he doesn't get pay-per-view points. They thought that was automatic. But, you know, he has this title and he's trying to leverage it now. But at the same time, the UFC has a lot of leverage because they control the title. They control, you know, who he fights. They control everything else. So we're seeing this kind of squabble over who has more leverage. And he's using what he has to try to get more. And I thought, you know, I guess I'd ask you first, Paul, I guess, when you watched it, what did you think do you think he has any hope of getting more out of this? Or do you think this was just pure frustration that he was vocalizing?
Yeah, I think he does. Actually, I'm not convinced that pay-per-view points aren't automatic for relatively automatic for title holders, and believe that it could be the case that he knew that he's not going to hit those minimums, and so he said that he actually negotiated a higher fixed amount or tried to. I believe that could be the case. But
well, I will say, I'll interrupt. I'll say I've seen several contracts where they don't have. Not everybody has pay-per-view points, even if they own the belt.
For title.
Yeah, there's base people I talk to. It's like a small, like 10 or 20% of all the fighters. But usually those are the top guys, either champions or contenders, that have it in their contract that if you hold the belt, you get points.
Right. Yeah. That's what I was saying. It seems like it would be relatively automatic, maybe not a given for everybody. But so DJ, right? When you look at his numbers, he as a numbers guy, he does not have a lot of leverage. But he's got that title. He's had it forever, and he's about to possibly break or tie the record. And everybody loves him. That would seem to be where, if there's going to be any leverage, that's where it is. That you do one bad thing about DJ, and the hardcore people are going to go off on you. But if you just look at him pure numbers, I mean, he does not have that much leverage for a long-time title holder. They've tried to make it work on pay-per-view. It hasn't worked. You know, he ends up on Fox a bunch, which should give him a bunch of exposure. But he hasn't had that Conor McGregor yet to help build him. But what do you think, Jason, about his leverage?
Well, I think that maybe John has something going with the Chocolito example, because the thing about Chocolito that helped him the last 3 or 4 fights, was he was essentially the sidecar to Triple G. And that helped immensely with ratings. And, he was on the pay-per-view with I think it was on the pay-per-view with Triple G. And now he's going to get his own main card the week before the Triple G fight, his rematch, I believe it is. And I believe that, I mean, so that's propelled him. So perhaps when you talk about the marketing of DJ, he's been sold as the main event. Whereas if you link him with somebody like a John Jones or another title fight, or a Stipe Miocic, or something like that, where he doesn't have to hold his own to sell, it may be beneficial. And if he were to get those lobby for those pay-per-view points, you would probably want to also lobby for the fact that he gets on a card at the end of the year card, or the July card, or one of these huge cards where they stack it up with multiple title fights or multiple great fights. So he knows that he's going to be have a lot of eyes on him, as opposed to being the guy on the Fox card in March after a big pay-per-view, or something of that nature. Because like Paula said, the numbers show he's not a huge draw by himself, and the Fox numbers are starting to show. I believe the last time the headline went in Kansas City, it was the lowest Fox ratings ever. So it's a hard thing to argue with the numbers.
Yeah, he's also too. I mean, like I agree. One thing Luke Thomas said is he's prestige. He adds prestige to your brand, but he can't really benefit from that because only the UFC runs flyweights, and he also can't really benefit because the UFC, it's their title. So it's not like he can force a bidding war with a bunch of promoters to bid on him in his next fight. He's kind of he adds prestige value to the UFC, but there's not massive competition for him to drive up that value. He has one market for flyweights. And I guess to show you the threat, how little the UFC considers a flyweight. I mean, Dana White said that they're thinking of folding the flyweight division. And so they've been talking about it for 3 years, which is kind of strange. That was 2 years after they made the division. So I don't know if that shows a lot of great foresight by the UFC. But apparently he said they might fold the flyweight division, get rid of it. And of course, DJ called the bluff and said, "Go ahead and do it." I'm not sure the rest of the flyweights were happy that he called that bluff, but he did. So they're all in it together to get rid of. They're willing to get up the flyweight division. So I guess for you guys to say, what does it tell you? Do you take it serious that they're thinking of folding the flyweight division, and what does it say that they even consider folding the flyweight division over a holdout like this?
I think they absolutely. I mean, if they're not considering folding the flyweight division, they're not doing their job back there in the back office. Yeah. You have to think about those things when one, right. It's like the way I look at it is kind of like shelf space on a supermarket, right? You've got this limited amount of fights that you do, or limited amount of space, and you want to stock it with whatever you think is the best for your brand, or will generate the most sales. But and so every flyweight fight that happens, someone else in some other division could have been in there. If you think you could expand those other ones, if you don't get a lot from having that flyweight title, it's definitely. I don't believe that they never considered it. Now, would they go through with it? I'm not quite sure yet, because what would they sort of expand with? It doesn't necessarily have to be another division, because you just throw more of other types of fights out there. But they've explored, I think, DJ on the co-main event twice. I was thinking of that question that you asked, Jason, about matching with John Jones. He actually has been matched with John Jones twice, way back in the day, and then what? Yeah, about a year ago.
Yeah.
But if they're not at least exploring that company is not doing their job. They have to think through that when you have sort of one product line that's not seeming to do as well as the others. What do you think, Jason?
Well, he does have a following with the video games and like his Twitch channel and whatnot, and that's I'm surprised that the marketing department haven't found a way to break through with him, and I'm not sure if it's whose fault it is. If it's the UFC's fault for not marketing him properly, or is it DJ's fault because he just, for one reason or another, he can't connect with the casual viewer that wants to buy a pay-per-view. I mean, if you actually watch the guy in person, he's just phenomenal. But for whatever reason, they just can't connect, and I don't particularly know why, because you would think that the gamer age would be similar to what a UFC age demo would be. But yeah, it's just hard to decipher.
I think one thing though is we got to get off the thing of saying that you have to be able to draw pay-per-view buys to be a star, because that's a limited amount of fighters that can do that. It's not just a limited amount of fighters; it's also a limited amount of titles. It's a limited amount of matchup. Sometimes it's the matchup, sometimes it's the title that's on the line, sometimes it's the fighter, and so it's a very limited amount of small group of fighters that can sell pay-per-views. If you're saying those are the only, if selling pay-per-views makes you a star, then we're talking about 4 or 5 fighters at a time that are stars. Probably less, 3. That's not me, people. That was a dog.
That was a dog.
Yeah. I mean, because if that's the case, Mickey Ward never sold pay-per-views, and I think everybody in boxing would say he was a star. He was a star because he was on, and his boxing matches on HBO didn't do gangbuster ratings either. They weren't monster ratings, but he was successful at bringing an audience that wanted to see him fight. So that I would consider Mickey Ward a star, that kind of caliber. And I think there's a lot more fighters that fit that in MMA than there are pay-per-view sellers.
Do you think if it's a lack of a qualified opponent for DJ that he lacks the foil? I mean, there was John Johnson for a little bit, but
I think he was really hurt that McCall had all those medical problems, because that could have set something up the way that first fight ended.
Yeah.
That it was a draw and then a close fight in the set, when they rematched with the title was on the line, because you can always make the storyline, even though I don't give McCall much of a chance to beat him, you can make the storyline that he should have been the first UFC champion.
Right.
So that said, I think he was kind of hurt by that. That could have been, and McCall is a personality. He's a weird guy. He has a weird, he has an interesting look. I think he's a much more sellable figure. So just as a rival, that would have helped him a lot. He was hurt by that. They just kept throwing random guys against DJ a lot of his fighters, how many times do they even get any sort of push the fighter he's going against? They're just some guy lifted off the Facebook prelims basically and thrown at him. So,
I mean, aside from Cejudo.
And Cejudo's like way too early. It wasn't like Cejudo's like, well, here's a guy that's on his way to being a known commodity star. Let's throw him at now. Before anybody had a chance to let it build, and to 2 years, maybe a year, 4 or 5 fights more down the line, where people are like, oh, this is the guy to beat DJ.
And the thing that got me on the marketing side was, I get it if you don't want to spend money on the guy, but I mean, come on, UFC, at least do the things that are basically free. Like the DJ was talking about social media, and I got 2 social media posts or something. It's like, recognize if you're not going to spend money on this guy. It was 1 week after UFC 210, so it's hard to market a lot. But the free things, like, bombard the market with the free ones. So just, if nothing, just to show the guy that you're trying. At least do that. You got to do that.
Yeah, that's I found interesting. This changes. Go on a segue here about something else. Is I also found it. You guys saw the Ariel Helwani interview with him, right?
Yeah.
And I found it interesting that is he's laying off all these complaints and gripes like a lot of other fighters have recently, all their problems with the UFC. He lets this long list of complaints, talks about how it affects all the fighters, and then talks about how he was motivated by Michael Strahan and Kobe Bryant at the Fighter Summit. And then Ariel brings up an association reunion, and suddenly just like crickets. Like, oh, that's a bridge too far. I'm not going there. I have no interest in that. And I found that fascinating. I thought that was really interesting. Like, that's the I'll bitch and moan and complain and call the UFC a bunch of assholes, but oh no, that's something I won't bring up. That's not acceptable. So he's not the first. That seems to be, and I don't know if it's because fighters are just resistant. They don't like the idea of unions. It's their political belief, what side of the political spectrum they're on, or if they really, or they view that as something that they don't want to bring up with the UFC. That would be a bridge too far with the UFC.
Well, you're the one who talks to these guys a lot more often than us, John. Have any of them told you what's happened when they've talked association, like Leslie Smith or anyone? But like to you, if there's anything you can share?
The people, they fall in spectrums, I guess. There's the people that are the hardcore supporters who are often out in the open. The Leslie Smiths, the John Fitches, the people that are really gung for the Cajun Johnson. These guys are openly supporting it. Right, and they're speaking publicly about stuff. Then there's fighters that support it, but won't come out in the public about it. And for a lot of them too, I don't think they've made up their mind. They're confused. First of all, they don't really know a lot about it. They haven't done a lot of research, and they're confused about all these different associations and unions that have popped up and all the discussions, because they might be like, I guess guys from the MMAFA will have whole thread lines and they'll talk. But I'm not 100% certain, and this sounds mean, but I'm not 100% certain the fighters that are in those threads talking, if they know they're talking with the MMFA or if they're talking with the MMAAA, if they're, that they're not keeping track which group is which. And then there's the guys that oppose it because they just don't like unions and stuff, or they think all these guys are crooked. And a big part in my head, too, is probably that I do think a lot of the management in MMA is hostile to the idea of a union or association. So that's a problem, too. I think, a lot of fighters are getting in their ear that this is not good to make an association or union. So not only are they working against the promoter, they're working against the man. Anybody trying to organize is working against the fighter's own management too, in some cases. So it's a confusing mess. I hope that answers it, people.
Well, maybe he's just still DJ is still kind of a company man at heart, and he doesn't want to answer any questions about the MMAFA or any of the associations or union talk. And the interesting thing is also, what's that?
Oh, sorry to bring. I was just going to throw it to you. I mean, the other interesting was T.J. Dillashaw got along.
Right.
This
That was.
Right.
I was going to bring that up. I mean, he
that's
was.
why I interrupted you because I knew you were. I wanted to get it in first.
Yeah. No, but yeah, no, you're correct. I mean, how hard? I mean, Dana White is pushing TJ. I mean, and TJ is big. I mean, he has the T-shirt and everything that he's a part of the association. So.
Wait, but has he done something lately? Has he maybe been moved off it? Like, have we heard?
He has a T-shirt.
he had or has?
I don't know. I don't do his laundry. I don't.
Because I haven't heard anything from him lately. I don't know if you guys have. That's the only reason I said it.
I haven't heard from any association lately, or I mean, at least the MMAAA.
Yeah, and I haven't heard from the PFA either, even though Boris said he wasn't going to quit, I guess, a little while ago. And then he said he was going to quit. Then he said he wasn't going to, but then we still haven't heard anything.
Did we pass that deadline? I don't know. All right,
yeah, we did.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Do you guys think it's possible they could shut down the flyweight division? I know going back to that. Do you think that's a possibility?
I think it's also a possibility the 145-pound women's division. It's never really appeared in the first place. They don't even have rankings. They have
Did it even happen?
Yeah, it never. We'll just write it off in history. It was a dream that we all had one time.
It is funny. For those who don't know, go to UFC.com and look at rankings for women's featherweight division, and you will find, I believe, no champion there, I think, and definitely no rankings. I don't even think they have Durandamy listed.
No, they don't.
Again, I mean, I have no clue with that. To me, that thinking was people are like, division was made for Cyborg, but I'm not 100% certain. I think that division might have been. Remember, they announced that fight before Ronda Rousey's fight. And I think the thinking was if Conor can get so much press for winning the lightweight belt, the idea was, I think, whoever was coming up with that scheme was when she beats Amanda Nunes, because supposedly a lot of people were saying that they were convinced she was going to kill Amanda Nunes, that then we'll put her have her move up, fight the 145 champion, and make even a bigger deal about it.
And fight Cyborg, really?
Well, I remember Cyborg wasn't booked. There's questions about how this is conspiracy theory level, but think about it. They offer Cyborg the fight. She turns it down, says she can't do it. Then they hot shot another title fight with
Holly
Holm in it. I mean, if you're thinking
that would be great.
A great fight for Rousey, you're like, oh, let's get this title in. We won't have Cyborg to interfere. We'll get the belt on Holm, and Rousey will win a title. And we'll put them up against each other again.
I like where your mind's at, except I lose all faith in UFC matchmaking if they truly believe that Ronda Rousey was going to kill Amanda Nunes. It's where it falls apart. The whole thing falls apart.
I'm not the one saying that. I'm not. That was Joe Rogan was saying that, on a show. That was the people. William Morris were convinced. They didn't even know who Amanda Nunes was. They couldn't keep track of her name. That's what he was saying. Hey, listen, I don't know. I'm not personally saying, but I heard from Joe Rogan. I heard from other people that were telling me that was the case with some people. And maybe none of them went up and asked Joe Silva what's going to happen. I'm sure he had a better idea. That was what's going to happen in that fight. Or Shelby was like, they didn't ask those guys. They were convinced that Ronda was, the Terminator was back. That the Holly Holm fight was a fluke.
Right. And now it feels just pretty much like it feels like a gamble almost, a little risk where you're basically milking probably a Cyborg title until she either loses a lot or retires, and then you see if you have that division built out or not. The cost of starting a new division is pretty much nothing. The cost of shutting it down if it's not built out seems to be almost nothing. You might have a few contracts left, but the interesting thing about it is these things don't seem like very expensive moves for the UFC. Starting a division is like a press release. That's it. Shutting down a division that's not built out is almost nothing.
And it also feels like it seems like I don't know why they seem to be neglecting, not neglecting, but ignoring what they have with Cyborg. Like they're hostile to the idea of, not hostile, but they're hesitant to work with her. She's not going to be as big as Ronda or even Holly Holm was when Holly beat Ronda. But Cyborg's, we're talking about stars. She maybe not sell pay-per-views, but she's a star. People will buy tickets to watch her. I'm just surprised they don't give her the belt and say, well, whatever 145 we can dig up to throw against her and watch her beat up, we'll run that as long as possible until we find someone that will, then when someone beats her, people are going to go nuts. We have another star. So I'm surprised they haven't done that. That's not their thinking. But apparently it doesn't seem to be their thinking.
Yeah, that's what I expected as well. I mean, that's what I still expect for the Anaheim show, but I don't know if rumors are changing. Jason?
No, I agree. I mean, she the last time she was on TV for that Brazil show, the ratings were great, and she does. I mean, she can present herself to be a appealable figure for people to follow. And I don't know if it's just the UFC doesn't trust her, or they're afraid of another USADA notification, or what the deal is. But yeah, it's not. So there's a disconnect somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they're worried. You know, stuff like the when she punched Magana at the summit. Maybe they worry about her act. But I mean, to me, Cyborg's big mistake was that she didn't punch someone she could fight later. There was nothing to promote at that point.
I think wasn't it earlier in the day or earlier that week? She had a picture with Megan Anderson. She should have just clocked her.
Yeah, or you know, or Kat Zagano said she'd fight her. She should have punched Kat, come just right behind the back of the head.
Yeah, they should have had it. I mean, I miss the. I mean, I miss the these retreats. I mean, I'm glad they brought it back. That Ortiz Mitrione squabble. I mean, they really outdid it themselves this year.
Well, we got time, so we should talk a little bit about that summit, because that sounded like an absolute clusterfuck. That thing. I mean, it kind of. I mean, there were actually a lot of fighters had some good word about certain, but there certain parts of it you're like, wow, this sounds like nothing like they planned when they brought these guys together. You had, you had Cyborg punching someone. You had Leslie Smith asking about unions and associations right in front of the management. You had Cajun Johnson bitching out the sponsors for all the money they lost, Reebok, and then you had another sponsor from, was it Anheuser-Busch?
Drunk.
I mean, 9:30 in the morning or something, and basically, mocking all the fighters because they're not winners. Yeah, that's going to go over good. I'm surprised that guy got out of there with his life, tell you the truth. I'm sorry the fighter wasn't waiting for him in the back alley somewhere.
Do we know if that guy's still working at Budweiser? Do we know?
No.
Anheuser-Busch? I mean, because it's utterly mind-blowing. Like, I get it. You work for a beer company. It's cool. Drink beer while you work for a beer company. But come on, man. Like, anybody who's giving a presentation, corporate presentation, knows I can't show up with a beer in my hand at 9:30. And I can't be drunk.
It's fun. I think his image of MMA and fighters was based on the Let's Bleed guy image that he had, that they're like, oh, fighters are just, they're going to be, all they care about are, it's like the stereotypical affliction wearing, maybe he is. Maybe he's one of the stereotypical affliction wearing fans that, you guys just cheer to die for me and that's it. You should love that. I mean, maybe he is a hardcore fan. I take back shit. That's some old school right there.
It's interesting that I've been on company retreats before in the past, and everyone seems to hate it or tries to find a way to get out of it. And what do you guys think about holding it every year for the UFC? It seems like they had the intentions correct in that they wanted to bring everyone together, to meet everybody and whatnot, and have them meet the sponsors. But it seemed like the execution didn't come out correctly. What do you guys think? Do you think they should do something like this again? Because it seemed like they wanted to at least look like they're talking to them.
They should. I think they can. It's good for the fighters in the sense that they build up some relationship with the management, but they probably should invite Leslie Smith in the future if she's going to organize fighters to get together and actually speak about grievances. They don't want, she's going to do her pitches or, stuff like that. But
in a side room.
And I think it was a good idea. I think WME might be going through a bit of a learning curve on the fighting side of things, but some of it is common. Like you said, you've been on company retreats before, but with corporate events, I mean, as a guy married to a finance person, I hear the stories of the money behind these things, and a lot of times it's coming from the WME world, like this, people complaining about, hey, the money you paid Snoop Dogg, give it to us. But these, there's a lot of money spent on these things, and there's a ton of employees sitting there saying, I would rather have some of this money, or you're not giving me budget, but we're throwing this huge party. Like that's a common thing. I've been in a room before where the CEO said, and everyone in here is millionaires now. And we're like, we are? That's news to me. Like these types of, I don't know, foot in mouth type of situations aren't uncommon. And it's just, I think a little bit of it's going to be a learning curve for WME, like things like the Kobe Bryant and people just saying, hey, look, man, I don't have the money that you're talking about. I think he was talking about investing, wasn't he?
Yeah.
But so they need to adapt a little bit to their market.
It's also bad time. I mean, not bad timing, but I mean, William Morris is kind of stuck because they're stuck with a hostility that the previous ownership started cause when the sales figure came out, and it's going to be a while. And I don't know if it's ever going to totally disappear, but it's going to be a while that a lot of fighters. I mean, anybody who talks to fighters know a lot of them are just frustrated and upset about that, especially guys at the higher end. When they see numbers being thrown around and they're like, well, I make 80,000, 60, 70,000 a fight, which, a lot of fans are like, that's great money. And they're looking at, you guys just got $4 billion and I'm getting hit in the head for 60,000. That anger they have is being directed. And plus all the other issues they had before with the Reebok deal and, the sponsorship deals before and the image rights, the things built over the years, that's all being directed now at the new management, the owners. You're the guys we're blaming for this because, Lorenzo took his money and he's buying artwork with his brother somewhere. And so
the art thing. Are you ever seeing the case where they bought that forged artwork? John?
Me? No.
Yeah. Oh, you're not?
I'm not right. No.
Oh. Frank Fertitta's caught up in that case with fake artwork.
Yeah. Well, they're big in artwork, those two. They buy art everywhere. I mean, I give them credit. Their taste in art is a little better than Dana's. Dana White's taste in art is not the best. I do not know what Scott Coker's taste in artwork is. I imagine it's like, I think it's probably a comic book collection or something like that. That's my guess. That's what he's got. And that's gonna do it for us, guys. No, do we have anything left? No, that's a fitting end on that note.
Scott Coker has a comic book collection. You heard it here. Fact from John Nash. Maybe, we don't know. Possibly.
I don't know about that. I'm just taking a guess on that one.
All right, not fact. We don't want to get sued. All right, guys. Anything else we need to throw out there? We missed a little bit about Bisping and GSP. Is there anything you want to say about them really quick, or call it a day?
That it's a kind of a joke fight, but
All right, let me ask you this. Odds that it happens before the end of the year. What do you think right now, today? Even with the interim title already made.
All right, I think it happens before the end of the year. I say odds. I say it's 2/3 chance, 67% that it happens.
What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, it happens the end of the year show.
You do? Yeah, I think it's definitely more likely than not. It's so weird, even though it's the interim title already made. It feels like, I think the WME or UFC people believe that they can almost do whatever they want when it comes to a money fight. And that even if you were to devalue that interim title, that hardcores would still watch and casuals would be like, ooh, 2 titles. And I kind of know who that Romero and Whitaker, who those guys are. Kind of.
Actually, I'll make another prediction. Romero or Whitaker, whoever wins it, will defend the belt against like the winner Mousasi Rockhold before they fight whoever. In fact, I bet you they never even face either GSP or Bisping. That's one thing. I think William Morris has really got it. This is something the UFC would never do, but I think the old UFC, the Fertittas, but William Morris, I think, really should think about this because the frustration by fighters. Especially challengers that just have no clue when they're going to fight for a title. And you have all these guys, clamoring for the Ali Act to kind of fix this problem. I think if they want to preemptively try to fix it themselves, just offer some basic guidelines of who gets a title shot. Give yourself, like, if you become the #1 challenger within the next year, I think we talked about this before. We have to beat a dead horse. You just give some guidelines to people so the fans and the fighters know where the progression of the divisions are going.
You mean like rankings?
Well, they had that, yeah.
John Nash, the man, wants some guidelines, I swear.
I want rules. That's what damn
it. And the great thing about guidelines is you can break them. Whatever that movie quote was, I don't remember what it was. Pirates of the Caribbean. More like guidelines.
Yeah, well, I mean, big loopholes in them. That we're following the rules. We just, this time we did this, and this time we did this. But they're in the rules, so they're there, so no one can complain because it's written out.
Yeah.
So, That's it. We have nothing more to say. Now we're all on pins and needles to see if Mayweather is going to fight McGregor. That'll be announced or not.
You think that one's happening before the end of the year?
Yes. I'm not 100% certain, but I'm pretty damn confident that happens soon.
I'm going now more likely than not as well. So a little over 50%. Jason?
Yeah, I think that it's going to happen, but I don't know. I'm a skeptic on this, but I think it looks like everyone's leaning toward that.
All right, there you go. I guess we'll see. Anything else, guys? Are we good?
No, we're good. Let's get out of here. We got things to do.
Reasonably short show. On behalf of John Nass and Jason Cruz, I'm Paul Gift, reminding you to keep doing business as usual.